What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back in the video. Today we're on a mission to find this year's Kyren Williams running back that is drafted in the final rounds of drafts, but turns into a mid to high-end running back one in fantasy. Now, when we did this exact same thing at wide receiver, we broke down, the need for great coaching, the need to be on a good offense with a good quarterback. And while that is absolutely 100% ideal at the running back position, it's much easier to, be a great running back on a great offense. It's not as important, and I didn't want to just kick out bad teams solely based on that, because at running back, what matters more than anything is opportunity. Is it easier to be a league winner in elite offense? Of course it is, but we have seen some examples of late round running back breakouts in recent seasons that got there on volume alone without the need to be on a top 10 offense. Remember Cordero Patterson back in 2021 on the Falcons? He was drafted outside the top 230 picks. He finished as running back 9 despite the Falcons ranking 26th in points per game that season. Remember Donta Foreman in the second half of 2022. He was drafted well outside the top 150 picks. He ends up being super valuable for people in the second half of the season. Panthers were giving him 20 plus carries a game, and it was really bankable volume. And I think that's the thing. It's not like the Panthers were good that season, right? It's that any running back that's going to get 20 plus touches a game is going to be a must start. I don't care if you're on the worst offense in the league. So again, ideal that we find one on, a really good offense. I don't want to eliminate the bad teams though, because then we might just be kicking out running backs that do have a path to significant volume just because they don't have a path to maybe the running back 1 overall. You know what? I'll take the running back 5 overall if we're going to get them in the final rounds. So adding on to what we're looking for in our search here, there's basically 4 key ways that a late round running back could become a league winner. It could be simply through an injury to the starter. We could have a situation like Jerome Ford last season. Nick Chubb goes down in week 2. Ford for the rest of the season gains a ton of value. It could be them breaking out as a player like Kyren Williams did last season. It could be them securing the goal line role on a team that scores a bunch of touchdowns on the ground. Remember Jamal Williams 2 years ago, Raheem Mostert last season, or maybe the starter just ends up being really, really bad like we had with Singletary last season. They had Dameon Pierce, just not fitting the system at all. And they're like, well, let's now go to Singletary. It wasn't like Singletary was the greatest running back of all time. It was that they didn't trust the starter, and so they went to him, gave him a significant amount of touches, and then he ended up being better than we think. So with all of those cases of these kind of breakout running backs, you can kind of look to those 4 key areas and kind of determine how exactly they break out. So what we're going to do is we'll look at a bunch of running backs this season, talk about the ways they could break out, and if there's a few of these that you really like, take them in the final rounds as your final running back pick. So we're going to start off with the running back that I have ranked as an 11th round pick, and then every single running back we talk about in order are going to just move a little bit later in draft. So our conviction is also probably going to drop, but they're going to be much cheaper as we go along, and we'll get to running backs at the end that are going to out to the top 200 picks. So first one up is Blake Corum, and how fitting would it be if this year's Kyren Williams is Kyren Williams' replacement? But to be honest, it almost makes too much sense that is obviously a possibility. I mean, if you're trying to find the next of someone, pick the player who the team drafted as their clone, who would have the exact same role on the exact same team if that starter went down. That is Blake Corum. Now, just because they think he's a Kyren clone and they think he's going to be good enough to mix in, good enough to have that featured role if Kyren Williams got hurt, doesn't mean that he is. Teams are wrong all the time with evaluations. We are wrong all the time with evaluations. So there's no guarantee that if Kyren got hurt, Corum would step up, produce exactly the same, and he'd be, a must-start top 7 running back every week. With that being said, they have almost no talent behind Corum on the depth chart, and the Rams have historically shown a willingness to feature one running back if that running back is producing. So in my opinion, among all of the late round running backs, I do think Corum has the most upside if there is an injury to the starter. And that's very important, right? Because if you kind of think about it in terms of like expected value of these picks, even if we kind of said every single starting running back has the exact same chance of getting injured, right? Not the case, but let's say that it was. You would still want to be targeting the ones where if there's an injury, they're a top 5 running back, not ones where if there's an injury, they're a top 25, 30 running back, right? There's a huge difference there in value. I think there's a world where Corum would be, a top 5, top 7 running back if Kyren got injured. I do think he needs that to happen because the team loves Kyren. Kyren fits the system really, really well. I don't think Corum takes over if Kyren is healthy, but Kyren has had a history of these foot injuries. He's not immune to injury. It could absolutely happen. And so I think it just makes Corum just a very obvious pick for an upside running back later on. Moving a tiny bit further in drafts, how about MarShawn Lloyd? My model looks at your college production, the competition you faced, so not all production obviously is the same, your athletic profile, and then ultimately where you got drafted, and it predicts how many PPR points it thinks you're going to have in your best season over the first 3 years. Basically a PPR prediction model, right? This year, my model thinks that there's a clear top 2 prospects, with Lloyd actually edging out Jonathan Brooks for that top spot. The model also comps him to DeAndre Swift, which I think is a perfect comp. Lloyd isn't someone that you want to overload with touches. You don't want to give him 20, 25 touches a game. You don't want him getting, 17 to 20 carries along with a bunch of targets, right? He is someone who is super quick in the open field, super explosive through a hole, and he kind of has that boom bust style of play, very similar to DeAndre Swift. We know historically Swift has had these games where it's like he has 12 touches, 15 yards. Next week he has 12 touches, but for 150 yards, right? Very boom bust. Now, I only give it a 15% chance of actually happening, but there is a path here where Lloyd could actually break out even without a Josh Jacobs injury. So if you don't know, MarShawn Lloyd was drafted to the Packers. The Packers signed Jacobs this offseason. I think there's a chance that Lloyd can kind of win that Aaron Jones role on this offense and force Jacobs into more of the A.J. Dillon role, which is more of that early down and goal line role, but goal line in the sense that, they would prefer to have him out there, but if they're playing hurry up and Aaron Jones was on the field, they weren't always taking Aaron Jones off the field to put on A.J. Dillon. So that would be obviously a very valuable role. We saw late last season when Aaron Jones was finally healthy, he was crushing in fantasy. Again, I would say it has a 15% chance of happening, but then you can also add on the chance that, well, what if Josh Jacobs gets injured? They really only have now A.J. Dillon and Lloyd. Then it would be obvious that Lloyd would be in that Aaron Jones role. So there are definitely outs here to where Lloyd could have significant upside this season and be someone that, we're starting consistently pretty much every format. Moving a little bit later, how about Ty Chandler? I do think Aaron Jones is the starter now on the Vikings. If you don't know, he's on the Vikings now. A lot of changes at running back position this season. But I think Aaron Jones is the pretty clear starter on that team. But Chandler was really good at times when given volume last season. You look at the box score and you're he had 2 good games? Sure. But whenever they actually used him, he was really, really good. He didn't have that many games where he had a large workload. And so we honestly can't be sure how good of a running back he is. So I still honestly think Aaron Jones himself is a really good pick in the middle rounds, kind of in that range where you're you know what? This running back could be a complete bust, but it's Aaron Jones. We've seen him be very fantasy relevant in the past. We've seen this offense in the Vikings feature one running back. Aaron Jones could be a top 7 running back this season, right? But we also know that Aaron Jones is turning 30 in December. He has struggled to stay healthy in his career. Behind those two, they only have Kene Nwangwu and Myles Gaskin, so those two are not getting touches. So Chandler, if Jones got hurt or Jones just kind of regressed in his age 30 season, or at least turning 30 at the end of the season, there's a world there where they go back to Chandler, who was great down the stretch for them last season, and they actually decided to give him a ton of touches on what should be a really, really strong offense. I think there's a lot of upside in that pick as well. Next up, we have Tyler Allgeier. This one should be unbelievably obvious to everyone. Bijan Robinson is the clear lead back, going to be featured this season, going to be a stud in fantasy when healthy, but any running back that's in line for 300 plus touches could get injured, right? It's football. It could happen to literally anyone on any play. And if he did, you'd have Allgeier now getting 20 plus touches a game on an offense that I expect to be a lot better this season. Also, Cordero Patterson gone. He's on the Steelers now, and so you don't even have him to worry about siphoning away touches. I mean, it's Jace McClellan and Avery Williams backing up Allgeier. So, I mean, Allgeier would be a top 10 running back any week that Bijan misses. Dropping down a little bit further, we have a running back that was getting way too much hype earlier in the summer, but thankfully, we've seen a little bit of pullback on that hype. We will see what happens now that camps are finally back. We could get that steamed up again. But I think, like, objectively, Kimani Vidal has upside this season, right? We know that the Chargers are going to try and be a very run-heavy team this season. And they're going to be a good team as well. Like, for as much as I would prefer that they, kept some good wide receivers, drafted wide receiver early, featured Justin Herbert, fact of the matter is, they're still going to be a very good team. And the only competition for Vidal right now is Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. Gus, I think, is, I don't want to say locked in, but pretty locked in to being the starter. But let's be honest. I mean, J.K. Dobbins is working his way back from a torn Achilles after he worked his way back from a torn ACL. Like, I don't know. I'd be a little bit surprised if he looked good this season, if he was able to stay healthy on a ton of touches. I think he's someone that they're like, we'll take a shot. If you happen to be good, sure, we're totally fine cutting you if you stink. I think Vidal should be second in line for those early down touches behind Gus Edwards. And you're telling me he can't win that job? Like, again, I think Gus will win the job, but it's absolutely possible Vidal goes out there. And it's one of those situations where, starting two running backs are like fine, but aren't really doing anything. And maybe Vidal is just as good or better than the community thinks he is. And he really pushes Gus Edwards for that 1A role. And you're getting a 1A on a really good offense that's going to run the ball a ton. Absolutely possible that occurs even without major injuries. And then you throw in the chance for injuries. I don't know. For someone being drafted in redraft outside the top 160 players, that's a lot of upside. It's just more like on Underdog. He was getting steamed a ton. And it got to the point where I was like, listen, like right now he is the third running back on this team. We probably shouldn't be taking him this early. It's been pumping back a little bit. Again, we will see what happens when camps open. But I wouldn't be shocked if he kind of gets hyped up a little bit more, becomes kind of undraftable at times on Underdog. But in your redraft leagues, if you only really need to spend your last running back pick on him, who cares how much hype he's getting? If it's your last pick, it's your last pick, right? So I think he's going to have a lot of upside, but one that we're definitely going to want to look at camp reports for. Moving later, Chuba Hubbard. Panthers want to run the ball as well a ton this season. We'll see how much they can. Remember I said that for the Chargers, but I was like, they actually can because they're a really good team. Remains to be seen how good the Panthers are going to be. I think they have the lowest win total, like 4.5 this season. So could be a situation there where they want to run a lot, but they can't as much as losing a lot of games, but they at least want to, right? And if they can get to like 6 or 7 wins, then maybe they can run it more. People are expecting right now. But you really look at this and you're like, okay, well, Jonathan Brooks is going to be the lead back, but he's still coming off a torn ACL. He is still a rookie. There's no guarantee he's 100% to start the season. And that's what you need for Chuba. You don't need, Brooks to like never come back this season. He's going to come back. What you need is the first month of the season for Brooks to either not play or only play like limited snaps, and for Chuba to go out there and perform really well. And if that happens, it's going to be more difficult for them to shift the workload over to Jonathan Brooks. And you could create a situation where they're like, you know what, in year one, Chuba's just playing really well. Why don't we kind of keep rolling with him as the 1A? We very slowly bring along Jonathan Brooks, and he provides way, way, way more value, especially for those of you in like, maybe you're doing like RB0, you're doing hero RB, where you invest in like one running back early, then you just hammer tight end, quarterback, bunch of wide receivers in the middle rounds, and you're just taking shots on running back late. Well, he's a good option for that because to start the season, him and like Jerome Ford are great picks for this because to start the season, they actually will have, a much larger role than their ADP suggests. And who knows, like maybe, you have Nick Chubb, you have Jonathan Brooks take a little bit longer than expected to return. And that's how you can capitalize on the early rounds. And then if they can perform really well, it's just hard to take a running back off the field. If like Chuba is averaging, 4.7 yards a carry and he's looking really good, it's going to be more difficult for them to be like, you know what, you're benched. We're bringing in Jonathan Brooks, who we haven't really seen before. Also think Audric Estime is, a ceiling running back this season that nobody is talking about. People ask a lot about Javonte Williams. I'm just having a hard time with Williams because of Estime. Sean Payton backfields are a gold mine for running backs in fantasy. Like historically, it's very rare that a Sean Payton backfield is bad in fantasy. So we want to get this backfield right. It's unfortunate that it does look like a pretty big committee, but my thinking with Estime is the throwaway pick, right? I mean, you can get him in literally round 18 on Underdog. It'll be your final pick in a redraft league. It's almost like take a shot, right? Like, especially if you're drafting this early, right before camps are really opening, right? I guess you guys are probably watching this right as camps are opening. He's a player that, like, if he goes out there and people are like, oh my goodness, he looks great in camp, they're using him a lot, his ADP is going to go way up. And, early in the season, if Estime goes out there and he's got like 10 or 12 carries in week one, he has a goal line carry, he's going to be one of the top picks on, the free agency list. And he's going to cost you a lot of your fab. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I just think, like, I don't know that Sean Payton really likes Javonte Williams that much, especially, drafting Estime, signing another running back, already having, like 2 established running backs before that. It's just like, it creates a situation where I'm like, maybe he really likes Estime. Maybe he wants him to be on the ground, a lot of larger on the ground. And maybe it turns into one where it's like, remember when like Kamara and Mark Ingram were both really viable in fantasy for a time on the Saints? Maybe it kind of becomes a situation like that where, Estime is kind of like Mark Ingram. And if you got that this late in the draft, you'd be super pumped about that. I want to end with a few running backs that I think have a chance to get traded away before the season starts. You look at their situation now and you're like, that's not that great. But that they're quality running backs that could have a much better role on a different team. 2 teams to me that stand out are the Chargers and the Cowboys. Maybe the Chargers just end up not liking their trio of running backs. Maybe they go into this thinking what I've said in this video, right? But then Dobbins gets hurt, Gus looks old, and Vidal looks like, what was he, like a 5th or a 6th round, rookie pick. Maybe he looks like that, and they're like, oh my goodness, we cannot have a ground attack highlighted by these running backs. We need someone else. Or maybe Dallas looks at their, duo of Rico Dowdle and Ezekiel Elliott, and they're like, okay, we think we're a good team, but like this is pretty pathetic at running back. If either of these 2 teams want to trade for a running back that's kind of like, at the end of a rotation, or even they think could get dropped and they're like, oh, we'll trade like a 7th round pick for this running back. I think that 3 names that kind of stand out to me are Dameon Pierce, Miles Sanders, and Khalil Herbert. The Texans are rolling with Mixon this season. And while Dameon Pierce is the backup, they could pretty much throw any running back in there and get better production than Pierce because Pierce doesn't fit their system. He does fit the system the Chargers are going to run, so that's one that like I could definitely see happening. But we saw last season that Pierce just doesn't fit the system. They don't really want him there. But he's still a quality running back. He's still young. He's still athletic. Like, I think he's a good running back that can fit on other teams. And maybe the Texans look at this and they're like, you know what? We can get something for him. And they do that. Maybe the Panthers, do feel confident in Jonathan Brooks working out. They like Chuba as the backup. And they're like, listen, Miles Sanders has some talent level. Someone will be able to, take him on. I think more, maybe like the Dallas would be a little bit of better fit for him. And then the Bears. They gave a much larger than expected contract to DeAndre Swift while already having, Roschon on that rookie deal, someone they drafted last season that they're probably not going to give up on. I don't know that they need all 3 of Swift, Roschon, and Khalil Herbert. And I honestly think Khalil Herbert is a really talented running back, mostly on the ground, can't really do too much through the air. But the Chargers, if the Chargers want that role and they don't think they can fill it with the guys they have, they could end up trying to trade for Khalil Herbert. So I would say I'm most excited about Herbert and Pierce. I could see either one of them going to the Chargers. I could see Miles Sanders potentially going to Dallas. Again, it's your final pick. All three could provide huge returns. Pretty unlikely, to be honest, that any of the three really do a whole lot this season, but it's not a big deal. If this is your last pick, you make it all the way to week one, nothing happens. In week one, nothing happens. You cut them, right? You need players on your team that you are willing to cut. And I just think, like, among all the players on this list, these three kind of go the latest along with Estime. And those four, I guess, are really strong picks for see if something happens. It probably won't, but if it doesn't, you can cut them, you can move on. So those are 10 running backs that have a path to a league-winning season. Most of them are going to end up busting, but that's just kind of how it goes in the later rounds. I do honestly think 1 to 2 names on this list are going to end up being super valuable at times this season. So if there are any names that stood out to you, make a note of that and just take a shot on them as like your final running back pick in your draft. And if you're like, Nick, this is great and all, but my league doesn't draft for another month, maybe some of these guys are going to go way up in ADP by the time that happens, then I have some good news for you. I'm currently in 57 slow drafts right now because you can draft anytime you want over at Underdog, whether you want to bust one out in 20 minutes with their fast drafts, whether you don't have any time like me and you want to just enter a bunch of slow drafts, make your picks a few times a day. Underdog has contests that you are going to love. They even have new ones. The marathon is scoring for the entire season, so weeks 1 through 17, just who has the highest scoring team. You've got the sprint where it's not, a playoff format in the final 3 weeks. It's more of a grouping format. Like whatever style of fantasy you want to play, they have a format for you. Plus, for those of you in redraft leagues who want my rankings for free, all you have to do is sign up for your first Underdog account today using promo code FFA. Deposit at least $10. You can use that plus the bonus they give you to enter into some drafts, and you'll get my Underdog and redraft rankings for free. A super easy way to get free rankings this season. I'm not sure why anyone wouldn't take advantage of that. So I'll be back tomorrow with another video. Please leave a like if you watched this far. Subscribe to the channel if you are new here. Thanks for watching.